So I'm Jen Deal. I am a lawyer and I'm also a coach for high achieving women. I mainly work with women lawyers. And one of the things that we are most often working on is how much women are doing, right? We are busy at work, we are busy in our personal lives, and it feels like you're just constantly trying to make it through the day, make it through the week, and make it to, whatever next event is coming in your life. And there's not a lot of breathing room. So I really love talking about this topic. And what we're going to do today is first, we're going to talk about how we've really glamorized being busy. We've turned it into this thing where we just automatically assume that being busy is a good thing. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then what I want to talk about is why I think that women in particular tend to wear busyness as a badge of honor, and why women, I find, are all busy across the board. And then I'm going to talk about the way that we communicate to ourselves about our busyness and how that impacts us, how it impacts other people. And then finally, I'm going to give you a couple tips for starting to cultivate a less busy life and mindset. So we're going to talk for about 30 minutes. And then what we're going to do is we are going to break out into smaller groups. And the reason for that is that I think one of the best things that we can do for our overall well-being is create community and connection. And I could talk about this topic for hours very easily, but when I'm thinking about community and connection, it's not only so that we feel seen and heard and we can share our stories, but I also think that we underestimate the value of crowdsourcing and problem solving with other women who have had similar experiences, right? Every time I'm talking to women about this topic, someone gives me an idea that I never would have thought of on my own, or an idea that I didn't think was possible for me. And so hearing what other women are doing and how they are cultivating a less busy life and mindset and what's worked for them can give us not only ideas for ourselves, but sometimes help allow us to give ourselves permission to do less and to be more intentional about the way that we are living our lives. We, of course, are the only ones who can ultimately give ourselves permission to do less. But I think hearing other women tell their stories about things that have worked for them and how they're still succeeding can really help. All right. Oh, and one other piece. So the breakout session is only going to be 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back and we're going to share takeaways. If you came here today thinking this was just going to be a webinar and you were not camera ready, totally fine. Feel free to leave your camera off, engage only as much as you feel comfortable engaging. The idea is really just to create a more intimate conversation around this. So we'll do the breakout sessions for 10 minutes. We'll come back and we'll share takeaways. And so hopefully we will get some really good ideas, because I'm going to offer you some ideas, but there are lots of people out here who are as smarter than me. They can offer you some really good ones. Okay. So we have really glamorized being busy. And there are actually a lot of studies out there that show that when we perceive other people as being busy, we perceive them as having a more elevated status, social status. We view them as being more successful. We view them as being important, all of those things. And we really see it in everyday language that we use or that we hear other people use, right? I came up with this list in about a minute of all of these things that I've said, I've heard someone say, my parents have said to me, right? Like never quit, give it your all, time is money, sleep is for the weak, snooze, you lose. All of those things are really indicative of how, as a culture, we have decided that being busy is a good thing. So it's become this badge of honor that we wear, and we do get a hit of dopamine when we get to tell people how busy we are, when we get to think how busy we are. And if you're anything like me, it was a regular practice when I was in Big Law to engage in the Busy Olympics, right? Where you ask someone how they are, they tell you, oh, I'm so busy, I'm doing X, Y, Z. And you just feel compelled to make sure they know exactly how busy you are, right? Trying to one up each other on how busy we are. And that's all because we have kind of decided as a culture, maybe without much intention, that being busy is a good thing and that we should all strive for it. So when I'm thinking about how we got here, I think it's a huge complex issue, right? We're not going to be able to pinpoint one thing in particular. But when I think about it from the perspective of why are people socialized as women, why do they tend to wear busyness as this badge of honor, as it being a good thing? And why are they just fundamentally doing more than they want to be doing? To me, it's twofold. So the first piece of it to me is our socialization. People who have been socialized as women have been taught that their value as a human being is dictated by what they accomplish and how much we're doing for other people, and whether other people approve of all of the things that we're doing. right? We have also been taught both explicitly and implicitly that our needs and desires are less important than other people's, right? That we should be putting other people first. And then finally, and I don't think this is unique to women. I think it's a productivity culture that we have in so many places, is this idea that we have to earn our rest or our relaxation or our leisure, right? We have to do all of the things before we are allowed to do something that we want to do solely because we want to do it. And so I think that socialization is often in play, and you're probably not going around thinking my value as a human being is dictated by how much I get done today. Instead, it's this unconscious programming that it runs in the back of our head, and it shows up in our brain in a way that sounds very logical. So when I hear women talk about it, this is how that socialization kind of shows up in our head, right? This is a waste of time. I don't have time for this. I have to say yes. I can't say no. I should do whatever that thing is because so-and-so asked me. It's selfish if I don't do it. I have to finish whatever it is before I can take a break. I have to finish whatever it is before I can even go to the bathroom. It's easier if I just do it myself. No one's going to do it as good as me. All of those things are happening in our head constantly. And of course, if that's the story that we're telling ourselves, we're going to act accordingly. But I think it all, at least in large part, comes from all of that socialization that we get, that we, in order to be valuable human beings, we have to be doing all of the things for all of the people and in a way that other people approve of. The second piece of it to me, and it's tied into the first piece, is just reality, right? So not only do we get that socialization and we have those expectations of ourselves, but other people have been socialized the same way that we have. They have those same expectations of us often, right? They also expect that we're going to do all of the things for all of the people. And then the reality that women face is that real biases and obstacles exist for us, right? And if you live with identities that have been historically marginalized, you're going to be experiencing more additional and different obstacles and biases, right? So the gender pay gap exists, and it is worse for most women of color. The authority gap is real. There's a lot of research out there showing that both men and women perceive women to be less expert than men, just generally, even if the woman has the same or more qualifications, right? If we look at the makeup of large law firms and the leadership in those large law firms, only 23% of equity partners are women. I think it's 4% are Black women, and that doesn't match up with the associates that are in the pipeline. I read recently that women on average, for women lawyers who bill time, their billing rate is 10 to 15% lower than that of their male counterparts, right? And so in a lot of ways, we are having to work harder to get what we want, to get the same thing, to get further along. And so when I think about the socialization and the realities that we face, I think that inevitably results in us staying busy all the time, right? The problem is that I think when we are so busy, we end up showing up in a way that lacks intentionality, right? We say yes to everything, we don't set boundaries, we do things that don't serve us, in part because of that socialization, and in part because when you are busy, it is very hard to create the space to decide what you actually want to do, to decide what serves you, to decide what moves your career forward, right? And when we are busy all of the time, this leads to us often, and not always, right? I don't think we can say that busy is a binary. It's always good, it's always bad. It always makes us feel good, it always makes us feel bad, right? But often when we are busy all of the time, we end up feeling exhausted and burnt out and guilty for all of the things that we're not getting to, right? Anxious, stuck, hopeless. And so all of that just doesn't make life feel good. And it also makes it harder for us to be intentional about the life that we want to live when we are feeling like this all of the time, right? And so if I'm really thinking about the core of this issue to me, it's that we have decided culturally that busy is a good thing. I think women have even more motivators, whether they like them or not, to be busy all the time. And if we're wearing this busyness as a badge of honor, if our self-worth is wrapped up in how many things we are doing, then the only way we get to feel good about ourselves is if we keep being busy, right? It's a trap. We have to keep putting coins into that vending machine to get that validation out that we need. And the coins are how many things we're doing, right? And so part of this to me is really becoming aware of how you think about being busy, what it means to you. Do you like it? Is it a good thing? Is it always a good thing? Is it sometimes a good thing, right? Start getting really clear on what is it that I think about being busy? Do I wear it as a badge of honor? If so, why? Do I like that? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the specific impact of the word busy, and you can insert anything else you want in here. Underwater, slammed, overwhelmed, all of those things that we like to say to one another. I think that when we think about how busy we are, when we tell ourselves we're busy, when we tell other people we're busy, there's an impact, both externally on the way that people respond to us and internally on how we feel and how we show up in the world. So if I'm thinking about external communication, again, this isn't a binary, right? There's no right or wrong answer to this. Each person is going to decide what works best for them. I'm not here to tell you what works best for you. I just want you to start getting curious about whether the way that you are currently talking to yourself and the way that you're currently showing up is actually in service of you and your goals and the life that you want to create. So if we're thinking externally, of course, there are going to be some positive benefits, right? I talked about that research in the beginning. People are going to have positive perceptions potentially if you tell them that you're busy or if they perceive you as busy. But I think often we don't stop to think about the potential negative consequence of telling people we're busy. And I'll give a couple of examples of how I've seen this play out in real life. So for example, if I am a colleague of yours and I've got a really good opportunity that I think you would love, but you're constantly telling me how busy you are, I might think twice about giving you that opportunity or letting you know about it, right? I might be like, I might think I'm doing you a favor. Oh, she's so busy, I don't want to bother her with this. And so we end up counting ourselves out of some of those opportunities that we might otherwise want, right? You still get to say no and decide it's not for you. But if you don't even know the opportunity exists, you're not able to make that decision in a way that works best for you. The other thing I think about often, because I used to do this as an associate, I used to tell people how busy I was all the time, and I was very busy. But I think as I moved into that role of partner, I could see that the associates who told people they were busy all of the time, often people either just stopped working with them or thought they weren't really good at managing their time, none of which was true or even warranted. But there are impacts of telling people that we are busy all the time. Okay, so if I'm thinking about internally, again, it's going to be positive and negative. I think there's sort of two schools of thought here, or impacts I see from this messaging to ourselves that I'm really busy or I should be busy. The first is sometimes it's going to feel good. We get that hit of dopamine when we get to say we're busy because culturally we've decided that busyness is a good thing. But there are also times when you may want to be busy, when it actually feels really good to you. So for example, if you have gone out on your own and you started a new business, you've started a new law firm, and you've been working to get that business in, and all of a sudden things are really booming, it might actually feel really good to you to say you're busy and to be busy, right? But for the most part, what I see, because women are doing all of the things, when we tell ourselves we are busy, when we focus on how busy we are, and when we communicate it to other people, it ends up feeling stressful and exhausting and overwhelming. And so part of this, I want you to be thinking about in the back of your mind, because all of this is often happening unconsciously, is to start noticing the way that you talk to yourself about your schedule, the way that you communicate it to other people. And once you start noticing it, you can start noticing how it's impacting you. Do you like the way it's impacting you? Do you like the way it's showing up? And the thing to remember about the way that we are thinking about busy is that busy isn't a feeling, right? And busy is a state of mind. It's not a state of being, right? There's no objective definition of what busy is. It's not about how many things are on your calendar. It's not about what's on your to-do list. Busy is a characterization that you make about external circumstances, right? And so, for instance, what is busy for you may not be busy for me. What's busy for me may not be busy for you. What's busy for you in one season of your life may not be busy for you in another season of your life. And that's because there isn't really a good objective definition of what it means to be busy. Instead, it's something that we tell ourselves, this characterization that we make, and that can impact us differently at different times. So I'm going to show you the way that I often see the impact of this. So every time we have a thought, like I'm busy, it creates an emotion in our body. Sometimes it's going to be a good emotion. Sometimes it's going to be a bad emotion. Right, sometimes it's going to feel great and you're going to feel excited. Sometimes you're going to feel overwhelmed and anxious. And when we have emotions in our body, that impacts the way that we show up, right? It impacts the action we take, it impacts the inaction we take. So you're going to show up very differently if you're feeling calm than if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling happy than if you're feeling sad. And so when I'm thinking about how I tend to see this line of thinking, this messaging to ourselves about how busy we are impacting women, it's often this first one. So this is really the unintentional thoughts that we're having from all of that socialization we get that we should be doing all of the things. Right, so let's say you've got your to-do list and your thought about that to-do list is, I'm so busy. And when you think that, you are likely going to feel something like overwhelmed. And overwhelmed is really a hiding emotion, right? Overwhelmed is not an emotion that tends to cause us to take action. Inaction is much more likely when we're thinking about overwhelm. So when you're feeling overwhelmed because you're telling yourself how busy you are, often you are going to feel a little bit of analysis paralysis, like, I don't know what to do next. I can't handle all of this. Often people tend to procrastinate when they feel overwhelmed, right? Because I'm so busy, it's not all going to get it done anyways. What's the point? I may as well just put this thing off. We often don't make a plan when we're feeling overwhelmed. We just kind of sit and spin in the overwhelm. So if you're messaging to yourself about how busy you are, and that's creating overwhelm, the outcome of that is often going to be that you stay overwhelmed and you continue to stay busy, right? You don't make any changes. But if we can slightly change the way that we are thinking about our schedule, about what's going on in our life, we can create better emotions in our body. And from those emotions, we're going to take actions that are much more in service of not only feeling better, but also the life that we want to lead. And so, for example, let's say you have that exact same to-do list. Not a thing has changed. It's the same number of things. All the deadlines are the same, but your thought is slightly different. So you have the thought, I am only doing the things that matter to me. If that's your thought, instead of I'm so busy, you're probably going to feel a little better, right? Maybe you feel a little bit more calm and you don't feel all of that overwhelm. And when you're feeling calm, you're much more likely to create a plan, maybe take some things off the calendar, maybe move some things around, maybe ask for some help. You're going to show up very differently if you are messaging to yourself differently. And so the outcome of that just slight shift in thinking is going to be that we end up making more time for the things that are important to us, right? We end up proving the thought true. Okay. So with all of that in the background, the socialization that we get and the way that we are talking to ourselves and the way that we're talking to other people and how that impacts our lives and how we're feeling, I want to talk briefly about how do we cultivate a less busy life and mindset. And I kind of separate these two out because I think it's twofold. First, you can change your thoughts, right? We can start unwinding this idea that being busy is absolutely a good thing. And when we have better thoughts and when we change the way that we talk to ourselves, we're going to get those better emotions and we're going to show up differently. You also get to just change your circumstances, right? And by that, I mean do less. And if you start doing less, some of your thoughts are automatically going to change, right? If I'm looking at my calendar and I can take 5 things off, I am automatically going to have some better thoughts. Or if I'm looking at my calendar and I've got more time to take care of myself in there, I'm automatically going to have better thoughts. And so the key for me when we're thinking about this idea of wearing busyness as a badge of honor, it's just to be slightly more intentional, right? We all have a ton of things going on. There are always going to be surprises that pop up. We're never going to be able to be perfectly intentional in our life. But if we can start adding a little bit more intentionality about the way that we are thinking about our schedule, the way that we are thinking about our self-worth, the way that we are messaging to other people, and if we can start doing less, even just on a small basis, that's going to start changing the way that your life feels and the way that your day-to-day experience feels. So the first thing I want you to be thinking about is what I'm going to call the elimination diet. So when I'm thinking about the way we communicate to other people, one thing we can do is just stop telling other people we're busy, at least at the outset of the conversation, right? And so if you're inclined to, when someone asks you how you're doing, or someone at work asks you, what do you got going on, right? If you're inclined to always say, I am busy, I am slammed, I am underwater, you can start making it a rule for yourself that that's not how you open the conversation. And you get to tell people you're busy later if you want, but if you change the way that you are communicating, not only does it make you feel better, right? Because you're not reinforcing that idea that you're super busy and you're not creating more of that overwhelm for yourself, but you also create a pause so that the other person has the opportunity to tell you what they want, if they even want anything, right? So if they have an opportunity for you, they're going to be much more likely to give it to you if you're not messaging how busy you are on the front end. And then you get to decide, do I even want to take this opportunity? You always get to say no. You always get to say, not right now, but I'd love it if you consider me later. I am actually really busy right now, so I can't make that happen, but thanks so much for the invitation. Or you get to say yes, right? You get to be much more intentional about the decision that you're making because you have given someone else the opportunity to offer you whatever the opportunity is. Okay. So if we're thinking about internal communication, again, it's to me about unwinding this belief that we have that being busy is a good thing, and also changing the way that we are thinking about our schedule, the way that we are thinking about our time. And so what I work with clients on is cultivating the 3 C's. And so what this looks like in practice is when you're feeling really quote unquote busy, but remember, busy isn't a feeling, but if we're feeling overwhelmed or anxious by the amount of things that we have going on, I'm going to pause, because we very rarely pause, right? We just power through it, move on to the next thing, say yes to the next thing. I want you to take a second to pause and then create some awareness around the way that you are actually feeling. So I actually have people say out loud what the feeling is that they're having. So I notice I'm feeling overwhelmed, right? There is a study that was done recently that shows that even just naming the actual emotion that we're having can turn the dial down on it. It can lessen the overwhelm to acknowledge that you're feeling overwhelmed. Because our negative emotions are messages from our brain. So your brain is trying to tell you that there is a problem. It's not always true. There's not always a problem, but that's what your brain thinks. And so the negative emotion is a way of messaging to you that your brain thinks there's a problem. And then when we ignore it by just pushing through, adding more to the calendar, it doesn't go away. It just gets bigger. It just feels worse, right? And so acknowledging that it's there creates a little bit of safety for your brain. Your brain can be like, okay, she knows I think there's a problem. We're gonna calm down a little bit right now. And then once you have done that and you've created some awareness, the other piece of the pause to me is creating the 3 C's, cultivating the 3 C's. So compassion, curiosity, and calm. And what I want you to do in that moment is just ask yourself, how can I cultivate those things? How can I create a little bit more compassion for myself, that I'm feeling this way, that this is what my schedule looks like? How can I create some curiosity? And how can I create some calm for myself? And this is going to look different for you at different times, right? Sometimes it's going to look like looking at your calendar, noticing, okay, I think I'm really busy, but I actually have plenty of time to get everything done. I don't need to change anything. I'm okay. I can handle this. Sometimes it's going to be like looking at your calendar, noticing that you do have too much going on and you want to take something off, or you want to ask for some help. Right? It's going to look different in each situation, but we never stop to ask ourselves, what do I need right now? And how can I give that to myself? Right? And so that's sort of my shorthand down there at the bottom. What do I need and how can I give it to myself? I think those questions automatically start to create some compassion and some calm and some curiosity. And to me, the compassion piece is really key. When I think about the women that I work with, every single one of them spends so much time judging herself and shaming herself that it gets hard to actually solve the problem, right? So we get really busy and then we're automatically like, I shouldn't have said yes to those things. I'm terrible at time management. I'm such an awful procrastinator, right? We add all of this shame and judgment on top of something that is a perfectly normal human thing to do. All humans get overwhelmed. All humans overschedule things, right? But when we add that shame and judgment on top, shame is another one of those hiding emotions. So if we are feeling bad about ourselves and we're judging ourselves, it gets very hard to actually figure out, what do I need in this moment? What would be helpful here, right? Because we are focused on the negative and telling ourselves that we've done something wrong. Okay. So if I'm thinking about changing our circumstances, so that's sort of the mindset piece of it. If I'm thinking about changing our circumstances, how do we do less? There are a million different tools and techniques out there for how to do less. I'm just going to go through a couple quickly here that I like. And I don't want you to think of this as another thing that you have to do. Like you have to do all of these things, another thing to add to the list. Just want you to be thinking, maybe I'm going to try one of these I'm going to give it a go. We'll see how it goes. If it works, maybe I add another one. But I don't want this to become another thing that you add to the checklist and then beat yourself up because you don't do. So the first thing I recommend people consider is time blocking. So a lot of you are probably familiar with time blocking. If you're not, basically, instead of using a to-do list, you actually put things on your calendar and you block out the time you think it's going to take you. And the reason I like this is because I think that people who are socialized as women tend to create these completely unrealistic to-do lists where either it's actually impossible to get it all done, or we can only get it all done if everything goes perfectly, right? There's no hiccups, life doesn't happen. And so when you time block, you actually get a visual representation of how much time you have to spend on things. And it's much easier to see, okay, my days are very full than if you're just looking at a list of things to do. And I like the time blocking as well because we are often going to underestimate how long it takes us to do things. And so when you start time blocking, you will find that you mess it up, right? Maybe you think I'm going to draft that letter. It's only going to take me an hour. It ends up taking you 2 hours. But over time, you learn more and more how long things are going to actually take you. So we can be more realistic about how much time we actually have to spend. Another one that I like is this rule of 3. And so the idea here is that you pick each workday 3 things that are a priority. And those are the 3 things that you're going to get done. Sometimes it's going to be one long thing, 2 short things, whatever, it doesn't matter. The idea is that you pick 3. If you have time left over, great, do some other things. If you don't, though, what the rule of 3 does is it forces you to start being more intentional about your time, right? Instead of saying, I can get to everything, I can do it all, we have to pick the things that matter most and the things that are going to move the ball along the furthest. So I really like that one. Another one that I like, I call this the Chanel rule. I think it was Coco Chanel that said, when you leave the house, take off an accessory. I want you to do the same thing with your calendar or with your to-do list. When you plan that to-do list out at the beginning of the week, I think it's safe to assume that it's probably a perfectionist fantasy that you're going to get it all done, right? Because we are always adding things on in the hopes that we get it all done, and we very rarely do. And so I want you to create it like you normally would, but assume that you're trying to overdo it and take one thing off. Again, if you find you have more time and you want to add something back in, that's totally fine. But what I find that women do is we plan these really overzealous schedules, and then we don't meet them, and then we beat ourselves up, right? We decide there's something wrong with us, as opposed to all of the socialization we get, the expectations other people have of us, what is actually on our plate, right? We make ourselves to blame. And so with this practice, this allows you to just assume that you were going to try and overdo it and to back off a little bit. Another thing that I like to do is a weekly evaluation practice. So what I find is that when we are planning our schedule for the next week, we're always future looking, right? Or if we're monthly, daily, whatever it is, we're always looking to the future to see, all right, how am I going to fit all of this in? And we never take a look back at what has happened in the past to see if we can learn anything from it. Instead, we just repeat the same procedures and processes over and over again, and that leaves us in overwhelm. So what I have my clients do often is when they are doing their weekly planning, I want you to actually evaluate the week before. Or if you're doing it monthly, evaluate the month before. And you can make it very simple. It takes like 5 minutes. The questions are what worked, what didn't work, and what am I going to do differently? And we start with what worked because the brain has a negativity bias. And so it's always going to focus on the things that didn't work. And again, when all we're focused on are the things that aren't working and we're judging ourselves for it, it makes it very hard to make any changes. So I like to start with what worked because there's always something that went right. Maybe you got something done faster than you wanted. Maybe you said no to something, whatever it is, figure out what worked and then what didn't work. Maybe you said yes to too many things. Maybe you had too many weeknight events, whatever it is. And then you can make changes for going forward, right? And I'll go back to the one that I think I skipped. You can set some rules for yourself in advance. I'll give you an example quickly. So I like to play tennis. And when I was in Big Law, I would be very busy and I would say yes to all of the tennis. So I would be playing multiple seasons. I'd be playing mixed doubles. I would be playing women's doubles. I would be playing singles. And I loved tennis. I really liked being on the court. But what I found is when I was playing all of those seasons, 4 to 6 times a week, there were matches and that was just too much. I always felt overwhelmed, even if nothing was really going on at work. And so I just made a rule for myself. I'm only doing 1 season at a time. And that makes it much easier to say no to something in the moment if we've already made the decision in advance that it's not a thing for us. And so what I think you'll notice, if you think about the times that you are overwhelmed, there's probably some patterns. There won't always be, but there's probably some patterns, right? Maybe it is if you're closing a deal at work, or you're drafting a brief, or you're doing some big project, right? Those may be the times you're more likely to feel overwhelmed. What are some decisions you can make in advance that are gonna help lessen that overwhelm when that time comes? Okay, and then the last piece of this, to me, this is my favorite one. I have a rest and pleasure first principle. And so what this means is that the way we typically do things is that we plan all of the things and then we try and squeeze in rest. We try and squeeze in pleasure. We try and squeeze in the self-care, right? And that often means it just doesn't get done. And so what I like to do is plan those first, put them on the calendar first, and then plan everything else around it. And you're going to be much more likely to fit that in. And it does require you to be more intentional about your time, right? And this can look any way you want it to look. If you are a person who never does any of this, maybe you want to start small. Maybe it's 20 minutes a day or an hour a week, and you put that on the calendar first, and then everything else goes around it, and that time is non-negotiable. All right. No, I'm going a little over the 30 minutes here, but I want to leave you with one thought, which is you have to intentionally choose your hard. Being busy all of the time is hard, right? It leads to the exhaustion, to the stress, the overwhelm, the burnout. But doing less is also hard, right? Because we do live in a culture that really glamorizes being busy. People do have expectations of us. We do feel some negative emotion like guilt or feeling selfish, or feeling anxious if we think other people are going to be upset because we're not doing all of the things, right? So it's hard on both sides. It is hard to be human. But if I'm thinking about it this way, and it's hard on both sides, then I always get to choose which hard I'm moving towards, right? Am I moving towards the one that is serving me, or am I choosing the hard that I am just defaulting to because of the conditioning that I've gotten, or because of the things that I believe? Okay. All right. So with that sort of as our background, we're going to head into these breakout sessions so that we can talk about this topic a little bit more intimately for 10 minutes. And then we will come back at 12:46 and share some takeaways. So hopefully we can crowdsource some good ideas for how to be less busy. All right. Hope we have Jackie back. All right, well, I'm gonna get started with takeaways. I'll share what we talked about in my group. The sentiment was that this is hard. It feels like an unsolvable issue, right? Which I think is true. And I don't think there is any way to solve it. We're never going to get to a place where we don't ever feel busy, or we don't ever feel overwhelmed, or we don't ever feel anxious, especially if we continue to work in the industry that we work in. So we talked about how can you do things incrementally and make small changes one step at a time. In part because that feels more comfortable if we can pick something small, and in part because sometimes that's all we can manage to do, but making that incremental change is better than not making any change at all. Can I have one of the other leaders share a takeaway? Feel free to, Pamela.
Yeah, this is Pamela. So our chat was really great. We talked about like challenging the culture of busyness and how each of us can do that. And like you said, Jen, it is really hard. And it's not just sort of a one and done. So even if you're redefining your boundaries, Leslie and Lori and Lynn and I were all talking about, you have to keep doing it. It's an iterative process. And even if you say, hey, actually, like, I know I've moved into this new role and I'm still doing some of my old role, but it's been 6 months now and I need to start really focusing my time and giving everything I have to my new role. People first aren't going to react well to that necessarily. Then you're going to have to continue to remind them gently that that is no longer a role. And you just have to accept that not everyone is going to welcome this change or to celebrate it. And I think that is the hardest part, right? Because people who do find themselves in those situations of, you know, the example is doing your job, your new job and your old job, which I think happens to a lot of us. Mm-hmm. When you find yourself in that situation, it's because you are a helper and because you do see value in helping others and you've become an expert and you have a loyalty. You don't want to leave people in the lurch. But when you start to transition away from that, people try to take advantage of the type of person you are. So it's really knowing first internally that I need to do this and then communicating that and continuing and understanding that you have to persist in it. And then it's not necessarily going to be a one-time communication and it's not necessarily going to be easy, but really being certain in yourself. And then also Leslie made this great point, which is having someone, a support network who can give you that check of like, am I crazy? Yeah. Or am I doing the right thing? And that having that, I think, is really important for me, at least, because I do think there's a tendency for, I don't know if it's women or if it's everyone, but I think especially women to think like, oh, I'm crazy because other people around me are telling me I shouldn't be doing this. And so having that support network is super important in keeping up with this challenging.
Yeah, I love that. That's all very helpful. Emma?
Yeah, we also had a great conversation as well. You know, some of the comments that I think women are just hardwired more than men perhaps to take charge and take responsibility both at work and at home. The idea of our response of I'm busy is a default response that sort of lacks intentionality. And in our group, we discussed about trying to reframe it or tone it down, maybe perhaps talk about, hey, I'm busy with this partner, we're working on these types of things, like focus on particular aspect of your busyness rather than the quantity of your busyness. And we also thought, you know, using the I'm busy is also a shield to, you know, say, hey, I'm sorry, you know, I haven't got back to you, or as a shield to sort of prevent others from putting more work onto us. So those are some of the talking points that we had in our group.
I love that because I think it sort of is a good indicator that it's not always good, it's not always bad, right? The best we can do is decide for us in the moment, how do we want to communicate what works for us? And we're not always going to get it right. Any of our other?
I'll go, Jen. Yeah. So to follow on a lot to what Pamela said, our group talked about actually being busy and having too much to do and how to address that. And one way is to be very intentional about the things that we are doing that we really shouldn't be doing, and to acknowledge that we need to talk to people about things that we shouldn't be doing. We need to ask other people to do things that we shouldn't be doing, and to recognize the things that we are actually doing that we should not be doing.
I love that.
Jen, just quickly, I know in the interest of time, but we had a really wonderful conversation in our group. And I think something that stuck out for me was just a comment about, the busyness badge is affecting us many times in the work setting, but what about in our personal lives?
Yeah.
What are we saying to our daughters and our nieces
Oh, I love
and
that.
our
Yes.
spouses, right? And that we probably, we would tell them if they were doing the same thing, like, you are not showing up the way you probably want to. And so really being thoughtful about what we're communicating. Is this sort of me walking around and I do everything and all the time and, for everyone? Is that really what we want other younger women to think? And I think we're putting too much pressure. The other thing we talked about is the American context. I did not grow up in America. This is not necessarily where I'm from. And I remember when I would go home from being in school in America, I'd go home and people were like, oh my gosh, you are looking tired. You need to rest and let's make you a meal. And what was prioritized was family and relaxation and taking time, vacation for a month, and really rejuvenation versus always walking around almost with this lagging of, responsibility. And we need to, maybe it is capitalism that's creating that. But whatever it is, we need to kind of think how we personally want to show up in the world.
Yeah, in that system that exists that maybe we can't do anything about just now, right? I love that.
Hi, it's Aisha. I'll go very quickly as well. We talked in our group about one of the things that struck me is having compassion for yourself. Someone mentioned speaking to yourself as if you were your best friend. And I liked, we liked what you said about choosing your heart and sort of reframing things for yourself and coming to the realization that whether you're centering yourself or whether you're keeping busy, it's not easy either way. And so you just have to do what's best for you, as you say, in the moment. And a lot of the members in our group also loved the tips that you provided in particular. And I think many of us are going to implement one or more of them moving forward. So thank you.
I love that. And we were talking in my group, I'll just say that, there's no one tool that is going to make everything feel better all of the time, right? And sometimes they're going to be harder to implement than others, but to me, it's worth the shot to try and see, does something different work for me? Awesome. Do we have any other?
Yeah, this is Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
I know we're running short on time, but real quick, we also had a great discussion. We focused on the question, what strategies we can use to prioritize our well-being. And there were some great points made. One was plan your day around a wellness activity. So making sure you get that morning run in. And if you're not that type of person, to have bring in another person, a trainer, to set aside that time and be more organized. Another tip was set a real bedtime, which I'm
That's
sure
a hard one.
That's a very
I'm
hard
very
one.
bad at that.
I commend you. I think that was Christine who was able to do that. And also from the client perspective, a tip we got was that it's okay to tell another person other things going on in your life. And in fact, many clients may welcome that and maybe a point of connection for you that sort of have you rise above the fray of everyone else who's busy, and create relationships in that respect. There was also the point made that boundaries are very important and prioritizing things are very important. So as organized as you can be, maybe the emphasis should be on what is most important. And it's sort of played into the dynamic of when you're in a team setting and you feel like you're putting out a bunch of fires, even though they're not real fires. Those are what, firefighters do. That maybe the problem is not so much there's too much to do, but the people in charge are labeling emergencies incorrectly. Not,
Mhm.
not.
We love to do
recognizing
that. We
correctly.
love to
So
do
if
that in
you're-
our
Yeah,
industry.
exactly. So if you're able to do that yourself, or, be in a position to make that assessment, that's another strategy that can be used.
Awesome. These are all great ideas. I appreciate them personally. All right, well, we are right at time. If you have any questions about this that you didn't get the chance to ask because we're short on time, come find me. I'm on LinkedIn all of the time. I love to chat about this stuff. I would love to connect, hear what you have to say. All right. Thanks, everyone.